Joining us this morning, Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard, live in Washington, D.C. Good morning. Thanks so much for joining us this morning.
Good morning. Thank you for having me on this morning.
You know, I know you were supposed to be here in the islands, but called to Washington for a special hearing regarding the future of the United States military involvement in Syria. Secretary of State John Kerry testifying at that. Tell us a little bit about how that went down. Secretary of State John Kerry in support of a military strike.
That's absolutely right. I had to come back to Washington, D.C. Unexpectedly a few days earlier than I had planned for this Foreign Affairs hearing that happened yesterday. I landed yesterday morning and went straight to the hearing where Secretary Kerry, Secretary Hagel, and the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Dempsey, made the case to members of Congress, members of the House, advocating for why they feel military intervention, this targeted strike in Syria, is important from their perspective. It was a hearing that went on for just over 4 hours. It was a packed house there, both with members who came back to Washington from all over the country for this hearing, as well as many people from the public who feel strongly about this issue, one way or the other, really highlighting that this is a very high-stakes decision that we have to make, and we have been hearing from people all over the state of Hawaii and all over the country who really understand that this is about making a decision about our troops and our future and whether or not we should become involved in another conflict overseas.
So, Congresswoman, being back a day or two now, tell us about the feeling in Washington, D.C. right now, as well as your thoughts at this point as to whether or not a military strike is justified in Syria.
I think the general feeling here that I have heard from other members of Congress is a feeling of deep concern, understanding the weightiness of this decision that we will be charged to make. Personally, you know, my concern lies largely within the answers to the questions I have with what happens next. If this action is carried out, this limited targeted strike with no boots on ground that the President is advocating for, well, what happens next? We're dealing with a civil war in Syria that has taken far too many lives, but by entering into this conflict, we are having an impact on a region that is experiencing a lot of instability and where the odds and the possibility of an escalation in this conflict are possible, if not likely. We're talking about the control of chemical weapons. What is the right course of action to take to make sure that no dictator or leader or country uses these chemical weapons to kill innocent people? And I think that's really where we need to focus, is how do we as an international community focus on this international problem? Obviously, I have very personal concerns coming from my service in the military, coming from the knowledge that we still have troops in Afghanistan putting themselves on the line. And we have to have answers to these questions before we commit ourselves potentially to what could end up being another prolonged conflict on the other side of the world.
And Congresswoman, I'm sorry, I wish we had more time to talk about this, but one more quick question for you. A U.S. vote in the Senate coming up next week on a joint resolution. I'm not sure if you had a chance to read that or not, but it starts out with to authorize the limited and tailored use of U.S. armed forces against Syria in employing chemical weapons there. What are your thoughts as to the language that's been discussed so far in this resolution and then moving forward in the House?
I think what you're going to see is both the language that the President has put forward that you're referring to. You're going to see the language that the Senate just passed yesterday from their Foreign Affairs Committee, which had a number of amendments which change the content of that resolution. And you're also going to see members of the House putting forward other various versions of resolutions that will both narrow the scope as well as look to broaden the possibilities for the President. I'm headed to a classified briefing in about 10 minutes here now, where I hope to get answers to the very great concerns that I have about our U.S. military intervening in Syria, where I'll be in a better position to make a decision.
Intense times for all of our lawmakers out there. Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard, thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Thank you. Aloha.
All right, coming up, a last look at this morning's weather and traffic.
All right, we'll be right back.